My name is Danielle Hartman, and 2 years ago, I walked out of the company I helped build, quietly, without a press release, without a farewell party, and without a single thank you from my family. Tonight, I sat in the back row of a grand ballroom lit with golden chandeliers, watching my sister Melissa bask in applause on stage as the CEO of Heart Tech Solutions, the same company we co-founded in our parents' garage a decade ago. Her voice was smooth, her dress flawless, and her words scripted to erase me. She gestured toward the front table and smiled. "Some of us have been here since day one. Others," she said, her eyes scanning past me like I was a stranger, "chose different paths, but that's okay. Not everyone's built to last in this world." Laughter rippled through the crowd. I felt it like a slap. I didn't flinch. I just picked up my glass of sparkling water and waited, because I knew something Melissa didn't, something the entire room was about to learn. Just then, a deep voice from the side of the stage spoke into the mic. It was Mitchell Crane, the lead investor. He adjusted his glasses, looked straight at me, then turned to Melissa. "Wait, she's still on the board?" You could hear the air leave the room. Melissa's smile collapsed, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. There was a time when they used to call me the backbone of Heart Tech. Not Melissa. Me. It started in the fall of 2012 in our parents' cramped garage on Elm Street. Melissa had just left a marketing job she hated, and I had walked away from a cushy offer on Wall Street. We were both restless, ambitious, and, at least back then, inseparable. The idea was mine, a financial platform for small businesses that couldn't afford enterprise software, but still needed stability. Melissa loved it. She said I had the brain, she had the mouth. And for a while, that formula worked. We stayed up late building wireframes, chasing seed funding, eating ramen noodles off cardboard boxes, while sketching out our pitch decks. I handled every spreadsheet, met every early-stage investor, and negotiated the first round of funding with a private angel group. Melissa, to her credit, was brilliant in the spotlight. She had charisma, timing, and charm. She made people feel like the future was hers to give away. And I gave her the numbers to back it up. Our first big client came 6 months in, and I cried in the shower because I'd secretly sold my car to make payroll the week before. Melissa framed the signed contract in gold foil and hung it in her new office. Mine remained in the corner, buried under budget reports and equity term sheets. Still, we were building something together, or so I thought. It started changing when our parents got more involved. They never understood what I did. Melissa would come home after a TEDx talk and be greeted with flowers and champagne. I'd finish an 80-page quarterly report that kept the company from violating SEC rules and be asked, "So, what exactly do you do again?" When our Series B round rolled in, the board, now swollen with family friends and outside money, started suggesting public-facing leadership. Translation: they wanted Melissa to be the face and me to step back. She didn't fight it. She smiled through the transition, assured me it was just optics, and that nothing would change between us. But everything did. Meetings started happening without me. Emails slowed. My signature was quietly removed from certain approvals. I asked questions and got polite clipped answers. Then one morning, I arrived at the office and my access badge didn't work. A junior associate let me in through the side door, like I was some ex-employee. Melissa took me to lunch that day. She called it a reset moment. She said the board wanted her to take over all executive roles, that my health looked strained, and that maybe it was time I focused on being a visionary from afar. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I sat through her rehearsed speech, watched her sip rose like it was all nothing, and signed the revised contract that gave me a non-executive seat on the board. That was the deal. I'd keep my equity, keep one vote, but lose the title, the office, and the day-to-day say. She hugged me when I left and told me she loved me. But the next morning, my email login was gone, and 3 weeks later, she publicly announced the streamlined leadership restructure that conveniently erased my name from every press release. No one asked where I went, not even my parents. They sent me a card that said, "Proud of you for knowing when to step aside." It was signed, "Love, Mom and Dad." I kept that card in a drawer for months, not out of sentiment, but to remind myself of the moment I stopped being the daughter they admired and became the shadow they tolerated. But I didn't disappear. I took my savings, my anger, and my experience and started consulting for fintech investors, quietly, strategically. I stayed off LinkedIn, no Instagram updates, no interviews, but I read every company filing, every quarterly report. I showed up to every board meeting, even if it was virtual. I voted when it mattered. And tonight, when Melissa saw me walk into that ballroom in a black dress and heels, she thought I came as a ghost. She didn't realize I came as a witness. Melissa always smiled when she lied. It was something I used to find endearing when we were little. She'd break a vase, flash those perfect dimples, and Mom would instantly forgive her. That smile bought her out of speeding tickets, into exclusive clubs, and, eventually, into the CEO seat of Heart Tech. And tonight, under soft amber lights and a sea of investors sipping wine, that same smile was back in full force. She spotted me near the rear table and raised her glass slightly in my direction. It was the kind of smile that said, "See? I'm still gracious." The kind of smile that wrapped a dagger in velvet. She was halfway through her keynote speech, talking about the company's journey, about our early days of struggle, and how some chose other paths when the pressure got real. Her tone was easy, elegant, like she was telling bedtime stories instead of rewriting history. The audience laughed, nodded, leaned in. No one looked at me. No one ever did. Until she said this. Of course, not everyone was built for scale. Some people shine in the garage, and that's okay. But Heart Tech is about vision, resilience, and moving forward. There were chuckles, actual laughter, like she had told a charming joke. I felt a man across the table glance at me, his eyes unsure. I gave him a polite smile. Not fake, not angry, just steady. Melissa knew what she was doing. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a slip. It was a public declaration. I am the success story. Danielle is a footnote. The irony was, she had invited me here. 2 weeks ago, I received the invitation in the mail. Cream envelope, embossed logo, handwritten note inside. Would be lovely to see you again. Let's show the world how strong sisters are. Signed, Melissa. I stared at that sentence for 5 full minutes. Strong sisters. The woman hadn't returned a single text of mine since I left. She hadn't even looked at me in board meetings. But now that Heart Tech was trying to attract another round of funding, she suddenly wanted a photo op. I almost threw the card out. But then I thought about how hard I had worked, about how my fingerprints were still on every line of code, every policy, about how my one vote on the board had blocked her from over-leveraging the company's equity 6 months ago, and how no one knew it was me. Maybe tonight wasn't about revenge. Maybe it was just about presence. So I came. I wore the black midi dress she used to borrow from my closet when she had nothing to wear. I walked in late, deliberately, and I sat in the back row like a ghost she couldn't shake. And yet, she still tried to bury me. I watched her glide across the stage in her tailored ivory pantsuit, hair perfect, voice smooth. Her speech was all about innovation, disruption, digital futures. And polished omissions. The crowd clapped at every line. Some executives I used to mentor now sat at the front, nodding like loyal disciples. My parents were there too, front and center, of course. Mom looked radiant. Dad wore the same suit he had at our Series A celebration years ago. Neither had noticed me. Or maybe they had, and pretended not to. And maybe I would have left it there, swallowed the insult, slipped out early, let her have her curated spotlight. But then he stood up. Mitchell Crane, the lead investor, tall, silver hair, sharp eyes behind frameless glasses. He leaned toward the mic, interrupting the applause with the calm confidence of a man who didn't need permission. And suddenly, everything in that room shifted. Mitchell Crane wasn't the kind of man who asked questions just to be polite. When he stood up, the room responded like a tide pulling back from shore, still, tense, expectant. Melissa froze mid-sentence. Her eyes flicked to him, then quickly to me, then back again, like a child caught rewriting the rules mid-game. "Excuse me," Mitchell said calmly, adjusting the lapel of his navy blazer. "Before we move on to projections, just a quick clarification." He wasn't looking at Melissa. He was looking at me. I felt it before he even said the words, that quiet charge in the air when truth is about to cut through a room like lightning. He tilted his head. "Wait, she's still on the board?" You could hear the forks pause on plates. Someone coughed and immediately stopped. The crowd's collective attention swung toward me like a spotlight no one had planned for. Melissa's smile twitched. "Well, technically, yes. Danielle holds a legacy seat from the founding days, but it's purely symbolic at this point." I raised my glass slightly, then stood. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and controlled, "my seat is active. I vote on all major strategic initiatives, including capital structuring and long-term debt planning." I didn't look at Melissa. I looked at Mitchell, and he nodded, like something had just clicked. He turned back to the crowd. "That's good to know," he said, "because when I asked about governance last month, I was told there were no founding voices left at the decision table." He wasn't smiling. Melissa tried to recover. "I think there was a miscommunication. Danielle prefers to stay behind the scenes." I responded evenly. "I prefer not to be erased." That line, those 6 words, hit harder than a gavel. Mitchell took a breath, then faced the board members at the front table. "For the record," he said, "my firm invests in leadership with both vision and discipline. HeartTech's numbers have been strong, but I've been concerned about the lack of transparency. Knowing Danielle is still involved gives me more confidence. In fact, her financial restructuring note last quarter was one of the smartest internal memos I've read this year." Melissa went still. She hadn't even known I'd written it. The board had attributed the memo to strategic consultants. They never told her the truth, because it would have challenged the story she'd been selling. I didn't need to twist the knife. I just stood there, breathing in the silence she couldn't fill. Mitchell wasn't done. "Danielle," he asked, "are you open to re-engaging more formally with strategic oversight? If this next round proceeds, I'd like to see a board subcommittee with you at the helm." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply said, "I'm always open to supporting the long-term health of the company. That's why I never left." That was it. A handful of people began to applaud. Not loud, but enough. The applause wasn't for Melissa's speech anymore. It was for something else, something older, truer. It was for the quiet resilience everyone had overlooked. I sat back down. Melissa didn't speak for the rest of the segment. Her eyes never met mine again that evening. But for the first time in years, no one in that room dared pretend I wasn't there. After Mitchell spoke, the mood in the room shifted. Subtly at first, then unmistakably. People who had clapped automatically during Melissa's speech now kept their hands folded. The executives who had lined up at her table before dinner now lingered on the sidelines. Even my parents, sitting 2 rows from the front, exchanged an uncertain glance that didn't escape me. Melissa tried to power through. She forced a laugh, cracked a joke about family keeping us honest, and pushed the agenda forward. But her voice had lost its rhythm. The room wasn't following her anymore. It was watching her recalibrate in real time and realizing how much of the story she had rewritten for her own benefit. And the worst part? She knew it. I didn't intend to humiliate her. That was never my goal. But truth, once released, doesn't ask for permission. It just settles, quietly, undeniably, into every corner it had once been pushed out of. During the networking hour that followed, I found myself surrounded by familiar faces. Some had avoided me entirely after I left the company. One woman, our former HR director, approached with a glass of wine and eyes full of regret. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "We all thought you had burned out, that you just disappeared." I nodded. "That's the version she gave you." She winced. "We should have asked." Another board member, one of the louder voices who once insisted on consolidating roles under Melissa, pulled me aside near the coat check. His voice was low, conspiratorial. "Danielle, that thing you did last year with the vendor rollover? That saved our margins, and none of us even knew it came from you." "I wasn't looking for credit," I said. "Maybe not, but you deserved it." I didn't say anything, but for the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost walking through my own legacy. Then came the one moment I hadn't expected. My father. He approached slowly, holding a cocktail glass that was mostly melted ice. His face was stiff, but not hostile. It was the face of a man wrestling with something too large to ignore. "I didn't realize you still had so much influence," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I didn't need you to realize it," I replied gently. He nodded. "Your mother and we should have asked more questions." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't reopen old wounds, but something passed between us, an acknowledgement perhaps that the narrative they had chosen to believe had been far too convenient. Melissa never came to speak to me that night. She left early, slipping out with one of the PR staffers, blaming a migraine. I watched her go, and for a brief second, I felt something almost like grief. Not because I wanted her to hurt, but because I had once wanted us to succeed together. And somewhere along the way, she decided that meant standing alone. And me? I didn't walk away from that gala triumphant. I walked away whole. I didn't take Mitchell up on his offer right away. He called 2 days after the gala, polite, professional. But beneath the words, I could sense the shift. He saw me differently now, not as some faded founder with a legacy vote, but as someone who had quietly held the structure together while others played for credit. He offered me a formal role on the new Strategic Oversight Committee, said I had the kind of judgment money couldn't buy, that I had already been doing the work, just without the title. I thanked him, told him I'd think about it. But I already knew my answer. I didn't need a new seat at a table that had once pushed me away. I wasn't looking to return and be celebrated by people who only remembered my name when it was convenient. What I wanted was peace, and this time I wasn't going to trade it for proximity to power, so I said no. But I didn't walk away either. I kept my board seat, and I made sure people knew I wasn't there by accident. Melissa never called, not directly. 3 days later, she sent a short email. "Thanks for coming. Hope it wasn't too uncomfortable." I stared at that sentence for a moment. It was peak Melissa, deflecting, polished, pretending nothing had cracked. I didn't reply, because I didn't need to anymore. That night had already given me what I came for. Not revenge, recognition, and more than that, clarity. I had spent so long thinking I needed them to say it. "We were wrong. You mattered. We're sorry." But when Mitchell looked at me and asked, "She's still on the board?" I realized the truth didn't need a microphone. It just needed space. And once it had it, everything else followed. My father called the next day, said he'd been reflecting, that he and my mother had never fully understood what I contributed, that maybe they'd believed what was easiest to accept. I told him, it's okay. And I meant it. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I didn't need the weight anymore. I didn't want to carry their blindness into my next chapter. For a long time, I imagined revenge would feel like fire, righteous, roaring, undeniable. That I'd walk back into that company, reclaim everything, and watch the people who hurt me shrink beneath my shadow. But it didn't happen that way. What happened was quieter, stronger. Truth stood up, and stayed. I didn't rejoin the company. I didn't give interviews or sign book deals. I let Melissa keep her stage, let my parents wrestle with their hindsight. I chose something better, dignity. Now, when I show up to board meetings, they don't ask why I'm there. They know. And when I vote, it carries weight. Not because I shout, but because I never truly left. There's power in being underestimated, in surviving erasure and coming back not to demand, but to exist, unapologetically. So no, I didn't get the revenge fantasy I once dreamed of. What I got was better. I got to be the one who stayed, and the one who was never really gone.